U.S. officials and the Taliban are in meetings to discuss ending direct U.S. involvement in Afghanistan. Now, take a look at this photo. It comes to us from the talks that are happening in Doha, and it does mark the highest level of negotiations between the two sides since the U.S. began peace efforts last year. U.S. troop withdrawal, a ceasefire, and security guarantees are all on the agenda. Well, that all said, women in Afghanistan and some in the international community are also watching these talks very closely, concerned about what Afghan women's rights could look like if a peace deal with the Taliban is reached. And with that, we are reaching out right now to Lauren Oates. She is the Executive Director of Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan. She joins us right now in North Vancouver. Lauren, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Hello.
Hello. So, this is not the first time that the U.S. and the Taliban have sat down for talks. Is there a greater concern this time around? And if so, why?
Absolutely. This time is different because seems to be a huge motivation on the part of the U.S. administration to get out of the country and to do it as expediently as possible, regardless of what that means for Afghans on the ground, including women. There's been many, many false starts before, and admittedly with this round, I also sat back and waited and said, let's see if this actually goes anywhere. And it appears that it is the most serious round of talks that have ever happened for a variety of reasons, including that it seems to actually be with the people who make decisions in the Taliban, whereas before sometimes it's been with factions that didn't have command the respect of the entire movement. So it seems to be the head honchos, the real deal. They're meeting, and there's a schedule. They want to have some kind of outcome as soon as possible, regardless of what that's going to mean for rights. And it's quite scary.
Well, even before 9/11, as the international community was debating the Taliban, women's issues were amongst the arguments to actually get involved in the country. And to my understanding, women's rights, that issue has been a part of past negotiations. Has that now changed?
To some extent, yes. There's always been a demand from women and from the women's movement in Afghanistan to preserve their rights that are enshrined in the Constitution that was passed in 2004, and to say these must be non-negotiable. And in turn, the rhetoric from the Afghan government under Karzai's administrations, the last president of Afghanistan, has always said that will be non-negotiable. And that has changed. That seems to sort of have slipped away. And the other challenge is that these negotiations are actually not with the Afghan government. These are between the Taliban and the U.S. administration. So, one might ask, how can you negotiate about the future of a country without involving the government of the country? So Taliban views the current government as illegitimate, and they won't talk, although they are having informal talks on the side. So when you're excluding the actual state, then it doesn't bode well for that state's ability to preserve women's rights. And the Taliban are quite wishy-washy. They do address the question. They say, we will ensure that women have rights in accordance with Afghan values or in accordance with Islam. But they don't go into any details. And you have to ask, well, what is their version? What is their interpretation of Islam or their interpretation of Afghan culture? And the scary part is that if you look at the areas where they're in power, that's up to 30% of the territory of Afghanistan, they haven't really changed at all from when they ruled the country in the 1990s up until late 2001.
And what does that mean for women?
That means that girls don't go to school. That means that women don't work, that women can't even leave their homes unless they're accompanied by a male relative. It means they have no role in public life. They certainly don't vote. They don't take up leadership positions as they do in non-Taliban areas where they have made significant gains. And I think that's important for people to recognize. We're not just talking about rights on paper, the rights in the Constitution. We're talking about really concrete, substantial, dramatic gains that have been made in the last decade and a half for women. They are everywhere. They're in government, they're in entrepreneurship, they're in education, they're in universities, they're teachers. So they have a lot to lose. This isn't just, going back to life immediately post-Taliban. This is a different country. And Afghan women are saying very clearly, their slogan is actually, we will not go back. They simply don't accept the idea of a future under the Taliban.
Lauren, I only have a minute left here, so I do want to ask then, if that is the concern, what's the solution then? What's the roadmap? What kind of guarantees are needed, and what has to be done to make that happen?
First, you've got to have women involved in the peace talks. They have to be at the table and not in a token role, in a meaningful role. Second, you have to guarantee those rights on paper. You have to say that the Constitution will not be up for revision. And thirdly, you have to guarantee their rights in practice. And I think the only way to do that is to say that if the Taliban want to be part of governing Afghanistan, they should do that through the existing institutions, the political institutions that have been developed since they were ousted, the parliament, elections, civil society, just like all the other politicians, rather than being handed over governance in this way for what is ultimately expediency for the U.S. to get out of Afghanistan.